Greetings, friends of liberty. I must mention that, being a sportsman myself, and with my friends often placing wagers on sporting matches of all sorts, as gentlemen here are wont to do, a famous pugilist of our era is found in County McCloskey, a superb fighter straight from Londonderry in the suburbs of Ulster. As one might perhaps expect, the McCloskey family crest features an arm with a dagger raised to strike. These Irish do get right to the point. In any case, my friends and I have full confidence in the pugilistic abilities, both within and without the ring, of County McCloskey, he having won numerous matches against a wide variety and assortment of those skilled in the art of fisticuffs. However, if we turn to your 21st century and its McCloskey's, we have here displayed yet again the fighting skills of the Irish, specifically Irish Americans, exhibited in economics in the person of Deirdre, formerly Donald McCloskey. McCloskey, a well-known free market economist, was trained at Harvard on the fallacies of Paul Samuelson's economics and then moved to the University of Chicago, among others, where she has practiced her own eclectic brand of historical and economic interpretation ever since. McCloskey's aim in this book as an economic historian is to prove that the rise of bourgeois dignity, along with increased liberty, were the two main causes leading to the increased innovation of the Industrial Revolution from about 1700 to 1850. She proposes the following method of proof by surveying all the other theories which attempt to explain why the Industrial Revolution happened, and by showing them all wrong, she will argue that, her theory being the only one left, it must be true by elimination. What are the other theories of the origin of the Industrial Revolution that she criticizes as she proceeds through the 46 chapters and 466 pages of her narrative? She criticizes step by step all of the following. Number one, the idea that the Industrial Revolution happened because of increased savings and thriftiness. Number two, that it happened because of the increased accumulation of physical capital, as with more machinery. Number three, that it happened because of the rise of the Protestant ethic, as sociologist Max Weber argued. Number four, that it happened because people became more greedy. Number five, that it happened because of the increased accumulation of material goods, she arguing that this has occurred during all periods of history. Number six, that the Industrial Revolution happened because of the gold and silver stolen in the New World from the Indians, or the labor stolen from slaves on the cotton and sugar plantations. Number seven, that it was caused by the accumulation of human capital until lately. Number eight, that it happened because of the increased ability to transport goods, as in the canals carrying coal and wheat to the docks, better public roads, and then the railway steaming into every market town, which according to her only had a small effect on national income. Number nine, that it happened because, as Jared Diamond of Guns, Germs, and Steel fame argued, geography played a significant role. Number 10, that it happened because there was so much coal in England. Number 11, that increased foreign trade was the cause. Number 12, that it happened because of British imperialism. Number 13, that it happened because commerce and trade with bigger and better ships and trains because they went faster than before. Number 14, that it happened because of British racial or genetic superiority. Number 15, that it happened because of a change in institutions themselves, providing better incentives and restraints, such as potentially greater protection of freedom after the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Number 16, that it happened because of increased protection of property rights. Number 17, or an increased protection of innovation through patents. And number 18, finally, that it happened because of the increased productivity of science. All these she denies as major causes. So now, having listed most of the theories that she tries to debunk, let's examine a select few in more detail. Numbers 6, 7, and 13 just listed. Number 6, she denies that the Industrial Revolution happened because of the gold and silver extracted or stolen in the New World from the Indians, or because of the labor stolen from slaves on the cotton and sugar plantations. Her argument with regard to gold and silver exploitation is A. First, mankind has looted from people from time immemorial. Why then did other industrial revolutions not occur during these periods of vast expropriation? B. Why was this accumulation, say with all the Spanish treasure ships, achieved so much earlier in the 16th century before the Industrial Revolution began in the 18th? C. She asks why Philip II, III, and IV of Spain, who after all were the principal beneficiaries of the treasure fleets the English and Dutch and French privateers and pirates preyed upon, would not have financed industrial revolutions in Balboa, Barcelona, instead of obstructing them. Thus, she argues when Karl Marx said that capitalist production presupposes the pre-existence of considerable masses of capital, he appeared to be wrong in that recent research only shows a modest amount of capital and then reinvestment of the profits. With regard to the issue of slavery funding the Industrial Revolution, she says, cotton is easily grown without slaves, and it has been so grown early and late, early in India, late in postbellum Alabama. With regard to sugar, she quotes Eldis and Engerman, who said, if the value-added and strategic linkages of the sugar industry are compared to those of other British industries, it is apparent that sugar cultivation and the slave trade were not particularly large, nor did they have a stronger growth-inducing ties with the rest of the British economy. C, finally, as she says with regard to the Belgian Congo and its rubber trade orchestrated by King Leopold, even when the colonized people were reduced to a form of slavery as in the concessionary system invented by King Leopold for his Congolese subjects and imitated by the French in their own Congo, only a few people gained from the severed hands in depopulated districts. When the clerk is murdered in the course of a convenience store robbery, the gain to the robber of $45.56 is not the same thing as the loss of life of the clerk. His lost life is not a gain to the robber. Thus, European imperialism. Having dealt with gold and silver and slavery, now let's turn to point number 7. Here she denies that the Industrial Revolution was caused by the accumulation of human capital. She defends her stance here by arguing that human capital, A, really means education, and that mass education only played a role mainly after the Industrial Revolution from 1850 on. B, even human capital today, she claims, requires continued innovation to keep it valuable. C, she claims that in some cases, education can be counterproductive, as in the bureaucracies of China in the Middle Ages that with their rote learning stifled innovation. And D, finally, she again reaffirms that education without the new bourgeois rhetoric is merely a desirable human ornament, not the way to human riches. It makes for a clerisy that may in fact be hostile to bourgeois values and very willing to be of professional service to the anti-economic projects of the emperor or the Lord Bishop. My view is different here. To show why, let me first define capital. Capital is simply the implementation of an idea into matter. So if James Watt improved enormously on Newcomen's steam engine and built it with matter, then that is a capital good. The idea plus matter. Similarly, if Watt spent decades trying to understand how and with what materials to harness steam power, his ideas and the matter of his brain and mind are human capital to produce physical capital goods. So from my perspective, the revolutionary inventions and innovations of the Industrial Revolution embodied in the human minds of inventors and entrepreneurs and scientists were a very productive form of human capital, producing material capital goods. So I think the instances of true human capital in the Industrial Revolution are significant. Finally, let's turn to point number 13, her denial that increased commerce and trade, along with bigger and better ships and trains, because they went faster and carried more, were a significant cause of the Industrial Revolution. She says, A, transportation is never more than 10% of national income. In Britain, it was something like 6% from 1780 to 1860. And she argues essentially that since Britain is an island, the improvements from these canals were not great over the water transportation network they already had, something like a 1.5% increase in GDP. Similarly, McCloskey says any trade, whether foreign or domestic, reshuffles. It doesn't discover. Trade is merely the moving of stuff from one place to another. Voluntary trade is prudent, yet shuffling stuff about for a modest productivity gain, even if a large gain in the margin of profit, is not the same thing as revolutionizing the means of production. Shuffling resources about is not the way to get the estimated factor of 16 that she attributes to the Industrial Revolution. I'm not sure about this, given all the knowledge and subtle factors that come to cities and countries that lie in the crossroads of civilization. Much of Mediterranean civilization, for example, during Greek and Roman times was essentially on or within short distance of the coasts or rivers, which not just facilitated trade, but the transmission of knowledge and culture to these coastal cities and civilizations. So now, having listed her arguments and examined 3 in some detail, let me evaluate her approach overall. Number 1. The first problem is that while she says in her title that economics can't explain the modern world, she constantly in her book argues that liberty, along with dignity, explains the modern world. But liberty, both political and economic, is understood to be a basic concept of economics. And economics is partly about understanding exactly why free societies or free market economic policies are more productive than coercive ones. So on the one hand, she wants to deny that economics is important, and on the other says over 100 times in the book that an economic cause, increased liberty, is highly significant in explaining the Industrial Revolution. Number 2, she claims that both dignity and liberty are important, but makes no attempt to show their relative importance. Is liberty much more important than dignity, or the reverse? Or are they equally important? Why? On what basis does she make her judgment? Number 3, she says that property rights are unimportant, telling us bizarrely that many countries in history have protected property rights, which is a serious mischaracterization. But whatever the case, the reality is that property rights are just the flip side of liberty. So if, as she does, she claims that liberty is important, then property rights must also be important because they're the exact same thing. So, for example, take alcohol prohibition in the 20s in the U.S. If the country makes a law to violate my rights to produce and consume alcohol, then it's also curtailing my liberty to drink alcohol. They're the same. Number 4, according to her, all she has to do is criticize the other thinkers, and her approach wins without giving any evidence at all. This is very silly. If there was increased liberty during the period 1700 to 1850, then you should be able to find evidence for it and show us. The same with dignity. Show us that dignity per se increased from previous periods. Number 5. Now with dignity, not only does she have to show that it increased, which she hardly did, But she also has to show that it's not just correlated with, but causing increased industrial productivity. And not just any causation, but a major causation that's more important than all the other causes she's criticized, except liberty. Why do I think it likely increased dignity isn't a major cause? Well, one way is by looking at individuals to see what makes them productive. If I look around at highly successful people, scientists, artists, businessmen, academics, I generally see people who realize the value of freedom of thought and action in achieving their goals. So they agree with the liberty part. Do you think Elon Musk is going to let people restrict his freedom of action and thought? Would Einstein have? Darwin? How many major artists will? So on an individual level, we can all see that freedom of thought and action are important for our productivity. But if we turn around and do the same thing with dignity, is an emphasis on dignity what distinguishes very successful people from other less productive people in any serious way? Not in my experience. Would you say that what characterized Einstein was a love of dignity? Mozart, Darwin, Newton, or hundreds of others? Is this what jumps out at you and strikes you psychologically and ethically when you think of them? Number 6, finally, if we ask under what circumstances ethical changes, like increased dignity, emerge in society, we generally find these changes first enabled by other factors, after which people see the possibility for acting differently. So what do I mean by that? Let me describe how infanticide and slavery were essentially eliminated. Infanticide in older times was practiced not because people were less moral than we are today, but instead because they had fewer choices, as in a lack of birth control, and among hunter-gatherers, the practical inability to raise unfit or handicapped individuals in a jungle tribe. In these cases, there was no other choice than to engage in infanticide, unless that is one abstained from sex or damaged the ability of the tribe to prosper by raising handicapped individuals as members. Similarly, the abolition of slavery ultimately came about because abolitionists saw that with the decrease in the amount of general societal warfare that previously had led to many people of captured nations being enslaved, and to the increase in the productivity of free labor caused by the great increase in machinery in the Industrial Revolution, that human beings could now choose to be very successful civilizationally without enslaving others. And so the abolition of slavery was first enabled by the increased societal peacefulness between nations, and secondly, the increased societal productivity by the Industrial Revolution. Then, afterwards, the most moral people in many countries saw or intuited that slavery could be abolished and fought to bring that about. Similarly, in this case, the increased moral qualities of the middle class in Holland and England, amongst which qualities were many others anyway, besides dignity, were caused by many other factors previously that led to the middle classes becoming more wealthy and their property rights being more protected. Increased dignity, then, by this understanding, was just one of many effects or results of the increasing level of civilization generally. In conclusion, whether this book really can be of value to the reader depends. First, if you're seriously interested in this subject, why the Industrial Revolution happened, then her criticisms of or agreements with many other thinkers are a good starting point for evaluating their approaches and reading those authors, and thus the book can function as a comprehensive study guide for further investigation. Another potential plus, if you haven't been exposed to too much information about the free market and economic history previously, is that her very extensive reading will sometimes lead her to introduce facts and observations about the value of capitalism. On the other hand, for those who don't fit into these categories, this book is twice as long as it needs to be, and since using the method of elimination, never bothers to bring much evidence to bear in favor of its own position. There's no real evidence that dignity is a major cause of increased productivity, and additionally, many previous economists have already pointed out how important economic liberty is. In addition, her prose style is quirky and very digressive, which can be distracting. So factoring in all these points, I would give this a C. And so now, heading off to spend some quality time with two of the house cats, who, while exceedingly self-assured, possess, thank God, not the slightest sense of dignity. I bid you well, and remain the Scarlet Pimpernel.